Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive.
Ooh, this one's going to be fun.
We're going deep into the world of Helicobacter pylori.
A classic.
You know it. For this deep dive, we're focusing on insights from Principles and Practice of Clinical Bacteriology, the second edition by Gillespie and Hockey.
A great choice for our medical microbiology listeners out there.
Definitely. So buckle up, get ready to test your H. pylori knowledge, and maybe even learn something new along the way.
Always something new with this bug.
All right, let's start with the basics.
Back to the fundamentals.
What exactly is H. pylori? Paint us a picture.
Okay, so imagine a tiny corkscrew-shaped bacterium, so small you can only see it under a microscope.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
That's H. pylori, a gram-negative microaerophilic spiral bacterium that lives in the human stomach.
In the wow.
And get this, it infects over half the world's population.
Seriously? Half the world?
It's been around for ages, but we only really figured out the link between H. pylori and all sorts of stomach problems back in the 1980s.
That's wild.
Right. And there's actually a whole family of Helicobacter species out there.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so H. pylori belongs to a genus with two main groups. The gastric species, which, like H. pylori, hang out in the stomach, and the enterohepatic species.
So they live in the intestines and liver.
Exactly. Now, H. pylori is definitely the most famous, or maybe infamous, of the gastric species.
For good reason, it sounds like.
But there are others, like H. sinetti and H. Finellia, that can also cause problems, especially in folks with weaker immune systems.
I see.
So yeah, this tiny spiral-shaped bacterium is living in the stomach, causing all sorts of trouble.
But hold on, how does it even survive in that harsh environment? The stomach is basically a vat of acid.
Right. It's amazing. H. pylori has all these incredible adaptations that allow it to not just survive, but thrive in the stomach.
Okay, I'm all ears. How does it do it?
Well, first off, it's incredibly mobile. It uses its sheathed flagella, kind of like tiny outboard motors, to move through that thick mucus lining of the stomach.
So it's zipping around in there.
Pretty much. It's like navigating a swamp, but H. pylori has evolved to be a pro at it.
Impressive. But what about the acidity? How does it handle that?
This is where things get really cool. H. pylori produces this enzyme called urease, which is its secret weapon against stomach acid.
Urease.
Urease breaks down urea, which is naturally present in our bodies, into ammonia.
And ammonia neutralizes the acid.
You got it. That ammonia creates a sort of buffer zone around the bacterium, protecting it from the harsh acid.
So it's like H. pylori is carrying around its own little antacid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Talk about a clever survival strategy.
That's incredible.
No.
But wouldn't all that ammonia be harmful to the bacterium itself?
That's where another amazing adaptation comes in. H. pylori has this special pH-activated urea channel called urease.
What does that do?
It's like a safety valve that carefully controls how much ammonia is produced, just enough to neutralize the acid outside, but not so much that it harms the bacterium itself. It's all about balance.
Wow, this bacterium is like a microscopic MacGyver, always finding a way.
I know, right? So it's got motility and acid tolerance down pat. What else?
What other tricks does it have up its sleeve?
Well, surviving in the stomach isn't just about dodging acid. It's also about staying put.
Making itself at home.
Exactly. And H. pylori has that covered too. It has special proteins on its surface. BABA2, ALPA-B, SABA, they're like grappling hooks that allow it to bind tightly to the cells lining the stomach.
Wow, so it's really anchored in there.
Yeah, like a rock climber clinging to a cliff face, no matter how strong the wind blows.
Amazing. So it's not just surviving, it's setting up camp in the stomach.
Pretty much. But there are still other challenges it faces. Think about oxidative stress.
Oh, right. Our bodies produce those reactive oxygen species.
And those can be harmful to bacteria, but as you might have guessed, H. pylori has a defense for that too. It produces enzymes like catalase and superoxide dismutase, which act like antioxidants.
So it's neutralizing those harmful molecules?
Yep. And it also has this protein called NAPA. It's kind of a two-faced protein.
What do you mean?
Well, on one hand, it helps protect the bacterium from free radicals, but on the other hand, it can actually promote inflammation in the stomach.
So even its defenses can backfire a bit.
Exactly. A real double-edged sword.
And speaking of inflammation, I'm guessing this is where things start to go wrong for the host. Time to talk clinical features.
You got it. Now, keep in mind, most people infected with H. pylori don't actually have any symptoms.
They're asymptomatic carriers.
Right. But for a good chunk of people, this persistent colonization can lead to a whole range of problems.
Like what?
First and foremost, chronic gastritis, which means ongoing inflammation of the stomach lining. And get this, Everyone infected with H. pylori develops chronic gastritis, even if they don't show any symptoms.
So even if you feel fine, this bacterium is still causing inflammation.
It is, which is pretty unsettling when you think about it. And in some cases, this chronic inflammation can lead to peptic ulcers, painful sores that develop in the lining of the stomach or the duodenum.
Ouch, ulcers definitely don't sound fun.
They're not. And unfortunately, it can get even worse. H. pylori is a major risk factor for gastric adenocarcinoma as a type of stomach cancer.
Oh, wow.
And for gastric multilymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic tissue in the stomach.
So this tiny bacterium is linked to cancer.
It is. It just goes to show how something so small can have such a big impact on human health.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And it highlights why we need to understand H. pylori from all angles.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's dive into those clinical challenges.
Yeah.
If someone comes in with symptoms, how do we even know if H. pylori is the culprit? What diagnostic tools do we have?
Good question. Lab diagnosis is key, right? We need solid proof before we start treatment.
For sure.
And with H. pylori, we have a few different approaches, both invasive and non-invasive.
Let's start with the invasive techniques. What do those involve?
The gold standard is culturing H. pylori from a gastric biopsy. That's the only way to definitively identify it and do susceptibility testing, which, as you know, is super important for guiding treatment decisions.
So we're talking about actually growing those tiny spiral bacteria in the lab. Old school, but effective.
Right. Though H. pylori can be a bit finicky to work with.
In what way?
It needs specialized media and a microaerophilic environment, meaning low oxygen levels, to grow.
So it's a bit of a diva in the lab.
A little bit, haha. And even then, some strains can be slow growing and hard to isolate.
So it requires some patience.
Definitely. And expertise. But there are other invasive techniques too.
Oh, like what?
We can also examine biopsy samples histologically. That means using special stains and immunostaining techniques to see the bacteria directly in the tissue sections.
So we're basically looking for those spiral shapes under the microscope.
Exactly. And we can do a rapid urease test directly on the biopsy sample.
Oh, using that urease enzyme we talked about earlier.
Yep. This test detects urease activity, which is a strong sign of H. pylori. It's a quick and easy test that can be done right there in the endoscopy suite.
So it gives real-time information during the procedure. Pretty cool. But let's be real. Invasive procedures aren't always the most appealing option for both the patient and the clinician.
Tell me about it. Thankfully, we have some good non-invasive tests in our toolbox.
Like what?
The urea breath test is a popular choice. It's based on the idea that H. pylori, with its trusty urease enzyme, breaks down urea, releasing carbon dioxide.
And we can detect that in the patient's breath.
Exactly. It's a clever way to indirectly measure the bacterium's activity without having to do a biopsy.
We're basically using H. pylori's unique metabolism to diagnose it.
Exactly. And we can also detect H. pylori antibodies in the blood. That's called serology.
Right, serology.
It's widely used for screening because it's relatively cheap and easy to do, but it can't distinguish between past and current infections, so it's not always the most accurate for figuring out if someone has an active infection.
Gotcha. So good for screening, but not always for definitive diagnosis.
Right. We also have stool antigen testing, which is becoming more popular, especially for screening kids. It's a sensitive and specific test that detects H. pylori antigens in the stool.
Ah, I see. So we have a whole arsenal of diagnostic tools to choose from.
We do. But just like with any bacterial infection, antibiotic resistance is a growing concern.
Absolutely. That's a battle we're constantly fighting.
It is. And with H. pylori, it's a major challenge. We're seeing rising resistance rates, especially to metronidazole and clarithromycin.
That's concerning.
It is. It can significantly impact treatment success.
So it's a constant race to stay ahead of the resistance curve.
You got it.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful overview. Thanks for walking us through the basics of H. pylori.
My pleasure. But remember, this is just the beginning. There's a lot more to learn about this fascinating bacterium.
I'm ready to dive deeper. Let's move on to the next stage of our deep dive and talk about the pathogenicity of H. pylori.
Let's do it. Time to unravel the secrets of this tiny but mighty microbe.
All right, I'm ready to explore the dark side.
The dark side of H. pylori.
Exactly. Let's talk pathogenicity.
Okay, so remember how we said H. pylori is a master adapter?
Oh, yeah. Those survival strategies in the stomach were impressive.
Right. Well, those adaptations are also what make it so good at causing disease.
So it's not just surviving, it's actively messing things up.
Pretty much. And it all starts with that chronic inflammation we talked about, the gastritis.
Right, even in asymptomatic carriers.
Exactly. So how does it do it? Well, H. pylori has a whole arsenal of virulence factors like toxins and enzymes that damage the stomach lining and trigger an immune response.
Okay, let's break that down. What are some of the key players in this arsenal?
One of the big ones is VACA, the vacuolating cytotoxin.
VACA, that sounds ominous.
It is. VACA can cause a lot of damage to the cells lining the stomach, disrupting their normal function and leading to those characteristic vacuoles.
Hence the name.
Exactly. And then there's CAGA, the cytotoxin-associated gene A.
CAGA. All right, another troublemaker.
Oh yeah, CAGA is a real bad boy. It gets injected directly into host cells by H. pylori.
Injected? How does it do that?
It uses a specialized secretion system, kind of like a tiny syringe.
Wow, that's sneaky.
It is. And once inside the host cell, CAGA can wreak havoc, interfering with cell signaling pathways, promoting inflammation, and even contributing to the development of cancer.
That's scary stuff.
Yeah.
So we've got VACA and CAGA both causing cellular chaos.
Right. And we can't forget about lipopolysaccharide, or LPS.
LPS, the classic gram-negative bacterial endotoxin.
The one and only. LPS is a powerful immune stimulator.
So it triggers a massive inflammatory response.
Yep. It sets off a cascade of events, leading to the release of cytokines and other inflammatory mediators, which contribute to the damage and discomfort we see in H. pylori infection.
So it's not just the toxins directly damaging cells, it's also the body's own immune response going haywire.
Exactly. It's like a double whammy.
Yeah.
The bacterium itself is causing damage, and then the immune system, trying to fight it off, ends up causing more damage.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is. And it's what can lead to those more serious complications we talked about earlier, like ulcers and even cancer.
It's remarkable how this tiny bacterium has evolved such sophisticated ways to manipulate the host.
It really is. And it highlights why understanding its virulence factors is so crucial for developing effective treatments and prevention strategies.
For sure. So we've talked about the arsenal, the toxins, the immune response gone wrong. Is there anything else that contributes to H. pylori's pathogenicity?
Well, we can't forget about its ability to evade the immune system.
Right, we touched on that earlier.
It's a key part of its success. H. pylori has evolved several mechanisms to avoid detection and destruction by the immune system.
Like what?
For one, it can alter its surface antigens, making it harder for immune cells to recognize it.
So it's like it's constantly changing its disguise.
Exactly. It's a moving target. And it can also produce enzymes that break down antibodies, those proteins that our immune system uses to tag pathogens for destruction.
So it's disarming the immune system's weapons.
Pretty much. And to top it off, it can even manipulate the immune response itself, dampening down certain pathways and promoting others that are beneficial for its survival.
Wow, it's like a master puppeteer pulling all the strings.
It really is. It's a fascinating example of how a pathogen can co-evolve with its host, constantly finding new ways to outsmart and manipulate the immune system.
So it's not just a battle, it's an ongoing evolutionary arms race.
Exactly. And it's a race that we, as medical microbiologists, need to stay ahead of if we want to effectively combat H. pylori infection.
Well, you've definitely painted a vivid picture of H. pylori's pathogenicity. It's amazing how this tiny bacterium can wreak so much havoc.
It is. And it's a reminder that size isn't everything in the microbial world.
For sure. Sometimes the smallest things can pack the biggest punch.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of understanding H. pylori. It's epidemiology. How does this bug spread? Who gets infected? Where in the world is it most prevalent?
Ooh, epidemiology. I love a good detective story. Let's dive into the who, what, where, and when of H. pylori infection.
It's like a whole world of microscopic mysteries waiting to be solved.
I'm ready to explore. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to how dynamic and fascinating the world of medical microbiology is.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is. I feel like I've not only refreshed my H. pylori knowledge, but also gained a whole new appreciation for the challenges and opportunities in this field.
I think that's what makes it so exciting. It's that constant learning process, the drive to understand these microbes and find new ways to tackle the infections they cause.
Speaking of finding new ways, you mentioned personalized medicine and immunotherapy earlier.
Oh yeah, those are game changers in the making.
They sound incredibly promising for H. pylori. Can you give us a clear picture of how they might revolutionize treatment?
Absolutely. Let's start with personalized medicine. Picture this. A patient comes in with suspected H. pylori infection.
Okay, pretty common scenario.
Right. So we take a sample, but instead of just culturing it and doing the basic susceptibility testing, we take it a step further.
How so?
We analyze the patient's genetic profile, and we sequence the genome of their specific H. pylori strain.
So we're getting a detailed look at both the host and the pathogen.
Exactly. We're understanding their individual characteristics, and with this information, we can predict how likely they are to respond to different treatments.
Wow, so we can tailor the antibiotic regimen to each patient.
Precisely. Maximize efficacy, minimize the risk of resistance.
That's incredible. We might even discover that some patients would benefit more from alternative therapies, or that they're at higher risk of complications.
Exactly. It's all about moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach to infection management.
That's the future of medicine right there. What about immunotherapy? How does that fit into the picture?
Immunotherapy is all about harnessing the power of the immune system to fight infection. Think of it as training the body's natural defenses to recognize and eliminate H. pylori more effectively.
So instead of just hitting it with antibiotics, we're empowering the immune system to take charge.
Exactly. One approach is to develop vaccines that stimulate specific immune cells to target and destroy H. pylori.
Like a targeted strike force against the bacteria.
Exactly. Remember those antigens we talked about? Imagine finding the perfect combination of antigens that trigger a strong, targeted immune response without causing too much inflammation.
That would be huge.
Yeah.
Are there any other immunotherapy strategies in the works?
Oh, yeah, there's also monoclonal antibodies. These are lab-engineered proteins that are designed to bind to very specific targets on H. pylori.
So they're like homing missiles zeroing in on the bacteria?
Exactly. They basically tag the bacterium for destruction by the immune system.
It's amazing to think about the potential of these therapies. And then there's nanotechnology, which still sounds a bit futuristic to me.
I know, it's pretty mind-blowing.
How could we apply that to H. pylori treatment?
Well, nanotechnology allows us to manipulate materials at the nanoscale.
Which is incredibly tiny.
Incredibly. And we can design nanoparticles that act like tiny delivery trucks, carrying antibiotics directly to H. pylori in the stomach.
So we can deliver a concentrated dose of antibiotics right to the source, minimizing side effects and improving treatment success.
Precisely. We could even engineer these nanoparticles to release the drug slowly over time, making sure H. pylori is exposed to the antibiotic for longer.
That's amazing. It feels like we're on the cusp of a revolution in how we treat bacterial infections.
It's a really exciting time to be in this field. And as we've been discussing, understanding H. pylori from its basic biology to these advanced treatment strategies is key to making progress.
I couldn't agree more. This deep dive has been truly insightful, and I'm feeling inspired to keep learning more.
That's what it's all about. Always stay curious.
For sure. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of H. pylori. We hope you found it as enlightening and engaging as we did. Thanks for joining us. And remember, never stop exploring the amazing world of microbes.